Hey, what's going on, DDO players? Axel here. Before I get started today, I wanted to let you all know that a couple days ago I started up a Twitter. You can follow me on Twitter at AxelAlexK. I did this mainly to give people an easier time of knowing when I post videos. From now on, every time I post a video on YouTube, it will also be posted on Twitter. So for those of you who use Twitter on a daily basis but may not check your YouTube subfeed all that often, you can follow me on Twitter and be updated of when I post videos. Alright, so let's talk about raids. Today's topic is what makes a raid great. And I went through this list in my head before I posted this video. I wanted to nail down what raids in the past I've enjoyed the most and why I've enjoyed them. Because there are certain reasons, specific reasons, and certain themes you can see in the great raids that kind of copy themselves in other great raids that come after them. And you can see the mistakes looking back at raids that you may not like as much, that are not as popular, and see kind of where they failed. And I think the developers have actually done a really good job of improving raids as the game has gotten older. So let's just go over what I think are the elements of a great raid. First point, in a great raid, everyone always has something to do. This is very important. I think the biggest flaw in any raid, or one of the biggest flaws, I don't know if it's the biggest flaw, but one of the biggest flaws is having a raid where only a few people are actually doing a certain part of the raid and everyone else is kind of standing around. Like take Deathworm, the mirror puzzles. I don't really like that mechanic just because it doesn't really engage the rest of the group. Yeah, there's some spawning mobs that the rest of the group can kill, but by and large, mechanics like that, one part of the group is doing the raid and the other part is just kind of standing there, and there's more examples of that in other raids. But I think that the best raids have mechanics that engage the entire party all the time in different ways. Take the Shroud, for example, which I think Heroic Shroud is the best raid ever made in DDO. You have a mechanic like Phase 3, the puzzles. Everyone is transported to an individual puzzle instead of one puzzle that the group has to do that only really two or so people can really do at one time. In the Shroud, they gave everyone a puzzle, so everyone is actually actively engaged in that section. Everyone has something to do. No one's standing around. You have to finish your puzzle. Some people are unlocking doors for others. Some people are carrying water. There's a lot to do. Some people are calling out where the wall is. If you're running Legendary, there's a lot of different roles in that section. They made puzzles in that raid in a way that actively engages the entire 12-man team. I think one of the next most important parts of a raid, of a great raid, is having a great boss battle. The boss of any raid is always the climax of the raid. It's always the highlight of the raid. It's always the first thing you think of when you think of a raid. It's like a new raid. Who's the boss going to be? What role does the boss play? What unique mechanics does the boss present? The boss needs to be challenging in a way that requires the party to work as a team, because a raid, in my eyes, is a very party-focused experience. Say, for example, the Dragon Giant pair in Fall of Truth. Someone has to tank one, someone has to tank the other. Someone has to keep the giant face towards the wall. Someone else has to kite the spectral dragons. There's a lot of party mechanics there that require the team to work together to defeat the final boss. I think that length is also really important in making a raid great. A raid, in my opinion, I think the perfect length for a raid in DDO is 30 minutes. I know that other MMOs have extremely long raids that can go for hours and hours and hours, but I've never really understood why people enjoy that. Like I don't know about you guys, but for me, I think that one half hour is just enough time to make the raid feel like a raid, while not being so long as to make it hard for people to actually want to run it on a regular basis. Because, say, sitting down for more than an hour is honestly a big time commitment for a lot of people. So having a raid be in that kind of 30 minutes to maybe 45-minute area, I think is the perfect time slot. Now, you might wonder, well, what's wrong with a raid being shorter than that? What's wrong with something like Mark of Death that's really, really short? Well, I think that when you get down to that short a time period, it starts to not really feel like a raid. Certainly you can run a raid in 5 minutes, but does it really feel like a raid? To me, a raid is a party experience that has different phases or different levels, and you have to slowly make your way through those different phases. And if it's just kind of jump in there and you're done in 5 minutes, it just doesn't immerse me in the experience. The next and one of the most important things about a raid is it needs to have loot that's great, that's appealing, that's worth going for. The thing about raids is that it doesn't really matter how well designed it is or how poorly designed it is. If it has great loot, people are going to run it. And even if a raid is amazingly designed, if it doesn't have appealing loot, people probably aren't going to run it that much. So it needs to have good loot, and there needs to be a proper reward there for people to run the raid. One very important point to me in a raid is its longevity, and it's very important for a raid to have something there for everyone to benefit from. I think that it's too bad in my eyes that a lot of the older raids in this game don't have long-term appeal, in that after you kind of get what you want after maybe 20, 40, maybe 60 runs, there's really no reason to run the raid. But I think the best raids are the ones that had that long-term appeal, like Heroic Shroud. You can always make something useful, especially for people who TR a lot, out of that raid. You can make displacement clickies, you can make all kinds of heroic weapons that are just awesome to use. You can make different types of weapons, you can make DR breaking weapons, you can make all kinds of various accessories and caster items. There's just a lot of stuff you can do with that raid, and there's a lot of appeal to the loot, and there's a lot of replayability because of that. And even back in the day, even if you, not so much now, but back in the day, even if you had grinded green steel to death and gotten all the items you wanted, you could still run that raid for the ingredients that were highly valuable, and you could sell those for platinum. So I like raids like that actually have a lot of replayability. Next, I think a great raid needs to have a variety of roles. Now, by this, I do not mean that a raid needs to require certain classes. I just mean that there needs to be certain roles that maybe one or maybe a lot of different classes could fill. Say you have your traditional roles that are dictated more around certain classes like healer and tank, but you also have other roles, say like puzzle solver or kiter, or the biggest role of all, leader. Different roles like that may not necessarily require a certain class, but give you a different way to experience the raid. That's the thing about roles, is even if you run a raid a lot as DPS, you could have a completely different experience by running it as a healer. So there's a lot of different ways to experience a raid, and if the raid is only DPS, say I don't want to pick on a raid, but say something like Defiler of the Just, it may feel more monotonous in the long term because you're always performing the same role. That's going to be it for the video today, guys. These are what I think are the most important aspects of a raid. If you want to, post a comment below and let me know what you think is the most important aspect of a raid to you. I'd be interested in reading that. As always, I try to read and respond to every comment I get. It's actually been kind of difficult lately, which is a good thing because I've been getting so many comments on my videos, but I'll try to respond if I can. Hope you all enjoyed the video. I will see you next time. Take care.